Today we're going to visit the Norman-Saracen-Baroque Palermo Cathedral, or more formally, the Metropolitan Cathedral of the Assumption of the Virgin Mary. There has been a house of worship on or quite near this site since at least the 7th century AD, and probably much earlier, although much of the evidence for those houses of worship comes from history rather than from excavations. The present cathedral was laid out and built by a Norman archbishop of Palermo named Walter in 1185, and contains additions that were made in the 14th, 15th, and following century. It has been a glorious mixture of styles from the beginning. Sicily fell under Muslim control in 831 AD and remained there until 1072, when Palermo fell to two Norman brothers named Robert and Roger Hauteville. The long and rather complex story of this family is far beyond what I can cover in this video blog, so check my WordPress site for the tale. Robert, the elder, was a great warrior. His little brother, Roger, was largely responsible for the capture of the island. Roger knew he needed to maintain order among his new subjects, and waging an expensive, deadly, and time-consuming war for 30 years was not going to be helpful. He needed to grant substantial freedoms to the Arabs, the Berbers, Byzantines, Jews, and others already living here. He did so in what we moderns would think of as a kind of multiculturalism. These groups didn't get full rights, of course, and women had almost no rights until there was no choice. One result of that tolerance was this Norman-Saracen-Baroque beauty that we're going to see today. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, I'm glad to meet you. My name is Judy, and I love history, travel, and finding out how people in different times and different places live. If you think this content is interesting or useful, please like, share, and subscribe. This will help my channel grow. You can read more at my blog site and my Twitter. The addresses are shown on your screen. This image from Google Earth gives you some idea of the layout of today's cathedral. It's cross-shaped, which is fairly standard, but there are a couple of architectural details that are obvious from this aerial view. First, this piazza is normally jam-packed with tourists and locals in my experience. What is unusual here is that the piazza and the church are on the same ground level. Quite often, churches and cathedrals sit significantly below today's ground level, the result of trash and debris being allowed to pile up for centuries. That didn't happen here. The piazza faces the southern facade of the cathedral. I'll tell you more about some parts of the cathedral in a minute. The basis of today's building was laid down in 1185 by Archbishop Walter Hauteville, the Norman Archbishop of Palermo and King William II's minister, on an area of a former Byzantine basilica. The cathedral is one of the most important historical buildings in Palermo, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and a kind of architectural style guide. The man who laid down the foundations and built this cathedral was Walter Hauteville. There's considerable controversy about whether he was even Italian at all. Some experts claim he must have been English and that his name meant Walter of the Mill. Whatever his origins, he came to Sicily as a tutor for the royal children of King William I, but evolved into an important and powerful advisor to the clan. Walter apparently recognized William as a person to be cultivated and, more importantly, promoted himself not just as a tutor for his son William II, but as a constant advisor and companion. He carefully made himself useful and curried favor with at least 2 generations of the family, although he wasn't successful with all of them. He rose through the ranks until he became a canon of the Palatine Chapel we visited last time, and a candidate for a vacant archiepiscopal throne in 1168. Walter succeeded less by election than by connivance. Controversy and political maneuvering in the church were every bit as common then as now. In the end, however, his faction bribed Pope Alexander III into confirming his election, and he was consecrated here in the Cathedral of Palermo, which he had designed. Walter wouldn't recognize the dome, today's pedimented main entrance, the archways leading to the episcopal palace, or the entire aisle built in front, surmounted by little cupolas, but he would recognize the oldest part of the cathedral, now the apse. This is the apse, or rounded inn of the cathedral, and it dates from the 12th century. It boasts Norman-style towers and a rounded area, complete with what could have been decorative window openings had glass that large been available, but they are not. The area between the 2 towers and the area above the apse are actually topped with what's called a battlement, or crenellation, like you'd expect to find in a fortress. The crenellation or battlement has a parapet, a short walk above the roof, and toppers called merlons, those are the solid parts, as well as crenels or opening a man could look through or even shoot an arrow through. Was this design meant for defense, or did it merely pay homage to the warlike necessity and engineering of the former Vikings who conquered the area and returned it to Christianity? This is a detail image of the apse end of the building. You can see the tower on the right, but the more important part is the apse itself. The Saracen motifs on this section of the cathedral are clearly visible in the decorations, but other features, including those on what should have been window openings, point to the Norman origin of the building. I mentioned that the modifications and remodeling extended well into the 18th and 19th century. This view shows you the little cupolas, designed to admit light to the side aisle, and apparently added the same time as the dome in the 18th century. The cathedral is connected, using two pointed arches, with the archbishop's palace, making the church look a lot more like a castle than a symbol of spiritual power. One of the much older churches on this site, dating back to the 7th century at least, and today's church are dedicated to the Virgin Mary. The star in the religious lineup is really a woman named Saint Rosalia, seen here on her perch in the piazza in front of the cathedral. Rosalia is nicknamed La Santuzza, which means Little Saint. She long postdates the original church, the mosque, and the rebuilding by the dukes. She died during the lifetime of Bishop Walter, but wasn't canonized for another 550 years. She is the patron saint of the city, who died a hermit alone in a cave on Mount Pellegrino in the harbor area in 1136. She is honored for her divine intermediation during a plague here. She's adored not just in Palermo, but more importantly as a saint who can be invoked in times of plague and pestilence. From 2020 onwards, she has been invoked by some citizens of Palermo to protect the city from COVID-19. We'll visit her impressive chapel toward the end of our walking tour. Holy water fountain, or stoop, is just a vessel containing water. It can be quite plain or decorated however the artist, in this case Domenico Gaghini in the late 15th century, is directed or sees fit. We don't know what it might have looked like originally, since it's been heavily restored, but I'm willing to make a couple of guesses. The piece we see today is about 15 feet tall and sits next to a rather sturdy column. I think it's sited there to provide support. There's a figure of a woman on top. Was she original or was she added, and who does she represent? My best guess would be she's meant to represent the Virgin Mary. The base under her feet doubles as an intricately carved canopy with exuberant bunting and cherub faces. I think perhaps the lady was a later add-on. There are two decorative plaques beneath the lady on top of the canopy. The top one, and far above the level any ordinary person could reach to damage, shows us a complicated view. You can see what looks like the entryway to a temple or a church with an arch and a large group of people. Some of them on the right are missing their heads and arms, clustered around a man on a kind of couch with wheels. Was the plaque damaged and that's why people are missing their body parts? Or were they the survivors or people who should have survived some kind of war? I think this must be a baptism, but who was the man on the couch? Was it a deathbed conversion? And where is the scene? Nothing in the material I've found tells me about this piece. Underneath in the second plaque shows clergy and parishioners gathered around a baptismal font. I thought it might be John baptizing Jesus, but the truth is it could have been anyone, and there's a sort of universality there that we should all appreciate. Once inside the cathedral, you'll notice the Baroque interior. Very different in style from what we saw, for example, in the Palatine Chapel of the Norman Castle. The cathedral is richly decorated, particularly in the side aisles and the chapels, and toward the apse, but the gilt, gold leaf, and frenzy of Byzantine-style mosaics are gone. Styles change. The dividing pilasters are decorated with statues of various saints. The magic here is found in some of the details of the chapels. I found the most interesting to be the area around the main altar and the chapel dedicated to St. Rosalia, along with a second chapel decorated with an image of a martyred Catholic priest named Giuseppe Puglisi. The rather plain ceiling you see on the left shows the area of the nave before you get to the dome, which you can see at the bottom edge of my photograph. Environmental damage, in this case water stains from a roof leak, have to be a constant problem in buildings this old. Repairing the leak will be expensive. Repairing the decorations might be even more expensive. This is actually in the newer part of the church. Beyond the dome, which you can see at the bottom of the photograph on the left, the ceiling becomes much more highly decorated and leads to a frescoed apse, which you can see in the bottom half of the photo on the right-hand side. This photo shows you the area beyond the dome and leading to the main altar. Above the altar is a fresco showing Dukes Robert and Roger. Below is a statue of the Virgin Mary. You can clearly see the rounded apse end of the building in this photograph. You'll recall that Robert and Roger, the Haute-Claire boys, the Norman brothers who captured this city, actually recommissioned a church on this site. It wasn't this church, but their work is memorialized in this glorious frescoed ceiling in the apse, dating from 1802 by an artist, Mariano Rossi. Notice how the artist chose to portray the brothers in more or less Roman noble attire. They weren't Romans, except perhaps in their imaginations as inheritors. Palermo Cathedral may be dedicated to the Virgin Mary, but has a special chapel dedicated to St. Rosalia. We met her at the beginning of this video blog. The chapel was built between 1631 and 1637 and goes beyond extraordinary into actually eye-popping. I don't think I've ever seen this much silver gathered up ever in one place. This is the high Sicilian Baroque style, and it deserves its name. This cathedral boasts monumental tombs, including that of Roger II and his daughter, a woman considered not important, at least at first, but who eventually inherited the throne. Her name was Constance, and she was the last born of Roger II's children. Constance was born in 1154, after the death of her father, Roger II. There was an ominous prophecy about her marriage destroying Sicily. As a result, she was confined to a nunnery until there was no choice but to spring her. She eventually became the sole apparent heir to the throne during the reign of William III. Her confinement all those years is probably one reason why she was still alive and kicking when the need for her arose. She avoided marriage and pregnancy, which was the leading causes of death of women for a very long time. In 1186, however, at the age of 32, she came out of that confinement and married Henry VI, who would be the future Holy Roman Emperor. In 1191, she became Holy Roman Empress when Henry actually did become Holy Roman Emperor. In 1194, somewhat after their marriage, their son Frederick II, who would be heir to the Holy Roman Empire, was born. William III, the then King of Sicily, died, making her not just Holy Roman Empress, but also Queen of Sicily. Henry died in 1197, leaving her as the Dowager Empress of the Holy Roman Empire and regent co-ruler of Sicily until her death the next year. She must have been a remarkable woman, although I had never heard much about her. Perhaps her star was completely obliterated by Eleanor of Aquitaine, who lived during the same time period. Her tomb, however, gives credit to the fact that she was a Holy Roman Empress, as you can see in the image above. Puglisi is a common Sicilian name, but Giuseppe Puglisi is an uncommon man. Unlike so many who talk a big story, he was willing to die for his faith. Nicknamed Pino, he was a Roman Catholic priest from Palermo who was assigned to a church in one of the tougher neighborhoods here in his hometown. Pino had a plan. He was determined to break the iron grip of the mafia on his parishioners, especially the younger ones who, because of lack of other opportunity, were easily recruited as foot soldiers for the mob. The first thing he did was to build a playground to encourage the children to come and play, instead of going to work for the mafia. Next, he put in electric lighting to make the playground available after school or after work for the older boys. His goal was to dry up the mafia recruitment pool. The mafia took considerable exception to his actions, but basically left him alone because he was a priest. Perhaps they imagined that bad things would happen to them if they harmed a priest, and in a way, they found out later that they were right. What pushed the local mafia over the edge wasn't his meddling in their recruitment plans, it was money. Specifically, Puglisi wanted to repair the roof of his church. The mafia naturally expected, as it had for so many other construction projects here in the city, to provide all the contractors. Apparently, Pino said no. That, surprisingly, was the last straw. Two local mafiosos sent a couple of thugs to deal with him. Pino apparently knew the men. The story goes that he thought one had repented, but knew the other had not. He said something like, "I've been waiting for you." They murdered him on his 56th birthday. Later on, one of them did repent, too late to save the priest, of course, but still something. Apparently tortured by his conscience, he went to the police and confessed all. Eventually, both of the thugs who murdered the priest and the mafioso who ordered the hit were found, indicted, tried, and convicted. They'll be spending the rest of their lives in prison unless the mafia manages to have them released. Such things have happened in the past. I think this man will eventually be recognized as a saint. He certainly did far more to further and protect not just the faith, but the faithful than many of the others we've talked about in my video blogs. And the actual evidence of his acts is documented and there for everyone to see. There may actually turn out to be benefits of the 24/7 news cycle. There are 3 steps to sainthood. A candidate becomes venerable, then blessed, then a saint. Venerable is a title given to the deceased person, recognized formally by the Pope as having lived a heroically virtuous life or offered his life for the faithful. He obviously did. To be beatified and recognized as blessed, one miracle is normally required through the candidate's intercession, although the miracle requirement can be waived. Pino has been beatified. Now he awaits canonization. Canonization requires an actual miracle after beatification. The requirement for that miracle cannot be waived, so the faithful must wait patiently and pray for that to occur. In a just world, eventually it will. Thank you for joining me today on a tour of the Palermo Cathedral. Check back next time for another adventure here on The Armchair Traveler.